What if a country everyone had written off suddenly fought back and won? It's early November 2025. Western news outlets are filled with panic. Evacuate Mali immediately, they warn. The government is collapsing. At the same time, thousands of Malian schoolchildren are quietly walking back into classrooms. Fuel convoys are arriving under military escort. Local markets reopen, and across Ségou, a phrase echoes in the streets. Essensi Nana. Fuel has arrived. Welcome to the story you won't hear on CNN. This is the counterstrike of Mali, backed by the unlikeliest of allies. It's the story of a country that, alongside two embattled neighbors, Burkina Faso and Niger, stood up not only to terror groups, but to the very narrative that called them failed states. And in doing so, they triggered a shift no satellite could detect, but every Sahel citizen could feel. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why Washington applauded, why Paris panicked, and why hundreds of African villages started believing again. November 8th, 2025. At 4:30 a.m., jihadist fighters from JNIM launched a surprise assault on Hermakono, a small town near Sikasso in southern Mali. Hours later, a second wave hit Soumpi, a dusty outpost in the Tombouctou region. It was a coordinated attempt to split the Malian army north and south at once. But this time, something was different. Instead of scrambling to respond, the Malian armed forces were ready. Reconnaissance drones had spotted unusual movement along key roads days earlier. That intel didn't come from foreign satellites. It came from their own region. The newly operational Unified Sahel Force, a joint military structure formed by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, had begun integrating battlefield data across their shared borders. Inside Base 101 in Niamey, once a French outpost, the new Sahel Command Center flickered to life. AES commanders coordinated real-time air support, troop mobilization, and border lockdowns. It was the first practical test of a 5,000-strong force with 15,000 more recruits and 9,000 security agents in training. At 7 a.m., a Malian combat helicopter strafed the insurgents' northern flank. By noon, ground units encircled Hermakono. In the afternoon, a joint AES Malian unit pushed into Soumpi, aided by close-range drone feeds and freshly encrypted communications from Niamey. The result: dozens of militants neutralized, equipment seized, civilians rescued. But most importantly, routes once considered suicide zones were now open for transport. This wasn't just a win, it was a warning. Mali wasn't alone anymore. The AES alliance, just months earlier dismissed by analysts as symbolic, was now showing real teeth. Through the integrated command structure, each member state contributed a core strength. Niger provided the air surveillance corridor and drone fleet. Burkina Faso deployed mobile ground units. Mali, as the frontline, offered bases knowledge of terrain and political will. The synergy allowed AES to operate like a single organism, shifting focus based on real-time threats, rather than waiting for foreign briefings. Critically, the Unified Sahel model flipped the script on dependency. No more calls to Paris, no more passive waiting on foreign advisors. This was Africans, leading Africans with their own command, their own rules, and increasingly their own victories. After Soumpi and Hermakono, something curious happened. Checkpoints grew quieter. Civilians returned to roads they hadn't dared to travel for months. In towns like Mopti and Kadiolo, fuel trucks started reappearing. This wasn't coincidence. In the 2 weeks that followed, AES coordinated 14 cross-border security sweeps, dismantling staging camps and cutting off supply lines to jihadist cells. More importantly, they protected the routes essential to life. Roads that connected towns, schools, markets, and yes, fuel convoys. The most visible symbol came on November 10th. 17 fuel tankers rolled into Ségou without a scratch. Crowds lined the streets. Men shouted. Women danced. Essensi Nana, they cried not just for the gas, but for what it meant. Life was coming back. And behind that celebration was a new force, a military and political pact formed not in a foreign capital, but right here in Africa. But as we'll soon see, Winning battles on the ground is just one part of the war. The next fight, convincing the world it actually happened. As bullets fell silent, something else began to rise, the rhythm of daily life. In Sikasso, schools had been closed for 2 weeks. Fuel shortages had paralyzed transport. Teachers couldn't reach classrooms. Parents feared letting their children out. But on November 11th, something changed. The classrooms reopened. Mahamara Gisa, director of the Sikasso Academic Zone, announced it with quiet pride. The students are back, the teachers are back, and we're keeping the regular schedule. No child will fall behind. It was more than a return to class. It was a return to normalcy. Even in towns still haunted by uncertainty, like Nimbugu and Kaboila, community leaders were organizing neighborhood watches. Young people were seen cleaning schoolyards. In radio interviews, students expressed hope. One girl said, when the school gates opened, it was like the war stayed outside. But perhaps the most striking scene unfolded in Ségou. For weeks, the town had been on edge. Gas stations were dry. Generators stopped. Refrigerators failed. People walked miles for basics. And then just before noon on November 10th, a sound split the air horns, engines, boots on gravel. 17 massive fuel tankers escorted by Malian forces and shielded by cross-border coordination from AES rolled into the city. Crowds swarmed the roads. Women began dancing. Children sang. One vendor shouted, "Essensi, Nana." The fuel is here. Governor Souleymane Traore was there to greet the drivers. He shook their hands like war heroes. "This isn't just fuel," he said. "It's the sign that we are standing again." Local radio replayed the moment for days. For many, it wasn't the arrival of gasoline that mattered most. It was the return of movement, of dignity, of belief. Even farther north, in the harsh expanses near Gao, another miracle had occurred. 40 additional tankers had crossed the desert from Niger under AES joint protection. These trucks had been targets of jihadist sabotage before over 40 were destroyed earlier that year. But this time they arrived. Safely, security, once a privilege, was now a promise. And behind this transformation stood something new. A united military mind built in Africa for Africa. While the fuel convoys captured public imagination, a different kind of convoy was underway in the halls of power. On November 7th in Niamey, the capital of Niger, the defense ministers of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger met under the banner of the Confederation of Sahel States. It was more than a meeting, it was a declaration. The vision set by their presidents, Captain IbrahimTraore of Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali, and General Abdourahmane Tiani of Niger, was now becoming structure. At the core of the discussion, the operational roadmap of the unified Sahel force and the activation of its integrated command post at Base 101. The meeting marked the approval of recommendations from their Joint Chiefs of Staff, first drafted in mid-October. More than strategy, it was symbolism. Ministers toured the newly equipped base, once overseen by foreign hands, now directed by Sahelian officers. Flags of the three nations stood side by side, not under any foreign coalition, but under a regional pact, born of shared struggle. General Sadio Kamara of Mali put it bluntly, "This is the foundation of our own defense architecture." AES was no longer just an idea. It had boots on the ground, eyes in the sky, and now a brain to think and act across borders. The structure worked like this. Niger housed the central coordination. Burkina Faso managed rapid ground deployments. Mali handled strategic operations and communications. Together, they created an ecosystem. Intelligence flowed from drone scouts to foot patrols. Response time shrank from days to hours. Decision-making was localized, not delayed by foreign diplomatic channels. But more powerful than any hardware or formation was the philosophy behind it. Captain IbrahimTraore, the young leader of Burkina Faso, voiced it in a way that resonated across the continent. No Sahel nation will be left behind, he said. This is not about charity or dependence. This is about sovereignty. That word, sovereignty, meant more than borders. It meant owning one's security, one's future, one's story. In the past, African security had been dictated by outside forces, NATO missions, French deployments, UN mandates. Some helped, many faltered, all left behind questions. Why are foreign troops still here? Who decides which towns to defend? What happens when foreign interests shift? AES sought to end that uncertainty. Its core belief was simple: those who know the land, its language, its rhythm must be the ones to guard it, and those who bleed for peace should also have a voice in shaping it. This doctrine wasn't just military, it was political. AES members refused to recognize ECOWAS sanctions. They withdrew from the G5 Sahel, seeing it as ineffective. Instead, they began building an African-led alternative, one that could defend and develop in equal measure. The vision was bold: to turn the Sahel from a battleground into a blueprint, a model where regional unity wasn't just a slogan, but a system. That system had now arrived, and its name was AES. As one Sahel analyst put it, what began as a crisis alliance may become the continent's first true sovereign bloc. And yet, for all its momentum on the ground and in government chambers, the alliance now faced its most elusive battlefield, the court of global opinion. While Mali was stabilizing towns and escorting fuel convoys, a different kind of storm brewed far from its deserts, this one in Western embassies and foreign ministries. On November 7, 2025, a series of statements were issued from Western governments. The French Foreign Ministry urged all its citizens to leave Mali immediately, citing a collapse in security. The European Union followed, recommending an emergency evacuation for all non-essential personnel. The tone was clear. Mali was unsafe, unstable, and unraveling. But inside Mali, something else was happening entirely. Schools were reopening. Local markets resumed. The streets of Ségou were filled with celebration, not fear. Malian officials, supported by the AES alliance, issued a swift response. "This is propaganda," said a government spokesperson. "We are stabilizing. We are governing. We are not collapsing." Just days before, Christopher Landau, a senior U.S. diplomat, had issued a tweet that stood in sharp contrast. He praised the Malian armed forces for their recent operations against the jihadist group JNIM, had an excellent call with Mali's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop. He wrote, "We discussed shared security interests and future cooperation. For the first time in years, the United States appeared open to recognizing Mali's efforts on its own terms, but not everyone was cheering. Traditional partners, particularly France, were watching their influence erode. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger had expelled French forces in previous years. Now, their military progress, achieved without Western troops, was proof that a new power structure was taking shape, one that no longer ran through Paris. This tension wasn't just diplomatic, it was ideological. On one side, the AES states were asserting a doctrine of African sovereignty, security decisions made by Africans for Africans. On the other, Western powers clung to a narrative of dependency, warning that without their guidance, chaos was inevitable. But Mali was demonstrating the opposite. Its cooperation with non-Western nations was expanding. Russia had begun sending defense instructors under a new format called Africa Corps, replacing the controversial Wagner presence. Turkey and China were supplying equipment and logistics. Even Algeria reopened security dialogue. The balance was shifting. While Western outlets amplified crisis alerts, the AES governments countered with footage: children in uniform walking to school, governors welcoming fuel convoys, drone images of cleared roads. This wasn't just a military campaign anymore, it was a communications war. AES leaders understood that perception shaped power, and so they invested in their own messaging platforms. Local stations played documentaries on joint operations. Hashtags like Sahel United and Africa Rising began trending. In interviews, Captain IbrahimTraore reminded viewers, the story of Africa must be told by Africans. And that story was gaining traction. Surveys conducted by regional institutes showed a dramatic rise in public trust in Mali. Belief in the government's ability to maintain order had grown by over 18% since September. In Burkina Faso, similar numbers followed, and across the Sahel, there was something even more powerful emerging than statistics: hope that the narrative of collapse could be rewritten. that sovereignty could be practiced, not just declared. And that's exactly what AES aimed to do. They began hosting international briefings, not in Geneva, but in Niamey and Bamako. They showcased operations, they released timelines, they challenged Western analysts to come see for themselves. Most didn't. But the ones who did reported back a different story of local commanders, managing logistics of coordinated patrols across former terrorist zones of populations engaging in neighborhood security councils. This was not chaos. This was construction. The final frontier was the information battlefield. In a world saturated with narratives, AES had one weapon that outsiders lacked: truth on the ground, tangible, visible. Documented truth, a school bell ringing in Sikasso, a convoy rolling safely into Gao, a joint patrol filmed between Nigerian and Malian troops. Each image, each soundbite was a piece of armor against disinformation. And so the real question became not what Mali was doing, but who was willing to see it. Because while the world debated headlines, the people of the Sahel were living a new chapter, one shaped not by withdrawal notices, but by return journeys, not by helicopters lifting off from embassies, but by motorbikes ferrying children back to school. In that contrast lay the ultimate proof of change. The world said Mali was on the edge, but Mali, alongside AES, had already taken the leap, and they were landing together. 3 victories, one message. Mali, alongside its brothers in the Alliance of Sahel States, has not only stood its ground, it has turned the tide. On the battlefield, coordinated operations pushed terror groups back. In the streets, schools reopened, fuel flowed, and families gathered again. On the airwaves, a new narrative was written by Sahelians for the world to hear. This is more than recovery, it is redefinition. Where the world saw fragility, these nations found resolve. Where others warned of collapse, they built connection. And where power once came only from outside, now it rises from within. This isn't just Mali's story. It's the story of a region reclaiming its voice. In every convoy escorted by AES, in every classroom reopened, and every farmer returning to his land, the same quiet truth is spoken. Africa is learning to defend itself, to develop itself, and to define itself. And yet, this journey is far from over. There will be new threats. There will be pressure, both internal and external. But the blueprint has been drawn, the foundation has been laid, and the world has seen what happens when a people believe, again, in their future, in their leaders, in each other. So what can you do? Listen. Share this story, challenge the headlines, support those who choose unity over division, sovereignty over submission, hope over despair. Because in the Sahel today, a new chapter has begun, not one written by outside powers, but authored by the sons and daughters of the soil. And that perhaps is the most powerful victory of all.